it's funny how breaking really, I would say, helped a lot with
Yeah.
that career because again, there's a lot of similarities, and I think the biggest thing is noticing what everyone else is doing and then thinking, how can I do it differently? I think that's the biggest takeaway that
Hmm.
breaking has really given me for
Hmm.
journalism.
Right.
Because you start to notice trends and patterns, and then things how things become kind of cliche or outdated, and then
Hmm.
you think, okay, how do I come about this with a fresh new idea or a different angle of how to execute this project or whatever?
Right.
And then I think breaking really has helped for that.
Okay, we're here with 12 from Ground Illusionz. Very excited to have this talk because we've never really met before in person, but I've heard a lot about you. Last year, I talked with Frost on the podcast, and he was saying, Matt is one of those guys that you got to have on the podcast and share his thoughts. And so I'm really glad to have you here. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise. I've always wanted to talk to you about breaking in Vancouver and
Yeah.
also why you're in Japan and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
this
So
is this is a good opportunity.
yeah, we'll get into all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like I'm really excited to talk to you about, yeah, a little bit more about, yeah, your history and Ground Illusions and stuff like that, but also just like the work that you do now. You're in journalism with
Mhm.
CBC in the past, and now you're with Forbes, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's cool. And yeah, just talking about that whole journey. And but yeah, we'll get to that in a bit.
Mhm.
But usually, yeah, what I get people to do first is like for anyone who doesn't know who you are, if you don't mind just giving a little background information on yourself, like who you are, how you got into whatever you do, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Matt Kang. B-boy name is 12. I'm in Ground Illusions, and yeah, like you said, I guess people in the scene also kind of know me from working in journalism. So got my start in Germany. I was working at Deutsche Welle, and then I worked at CBC, CTV as a reporter for quite a long time, and then I moved to San Francisco in 2015, and then ended up joining at Forbes. So I'm on their video department. We do like interviews, long form, short videos, basically any video content you see that has Forbes on it.
Cool.
Our team probably touches it.
Cool.
And then for breaking, yeah, I've been breaking since 1999. I started in London, Ontario. It was so I went to high school there, and I'm trying to remember how I really got into it. It was it was because my mom always wanted me to go to high school dances for some reason. She just thought it would be a good social activity, so I wasn't completely academic, which seems kind of counterculture to most Asian parenting. But
Yeah.
she was very adamant about you should go to dances. And so I go to these things and I wouldn't really know what to do because I was super shy, and I didn't really want to ask anyone to dance or whatever. And I would just be at the back with everybody else. And then I would notice that whenever It's Like That by Run DMC, the Jason Nevins version, or
Yeah.
Rappers Delight came on, there would just be this huge commotion and everyone would form into the middle. And I didn't really understand what was going on. And then when that happened, maybe the third time, I went to the circle and I asked somebody, like, what's going on? Why is it like a fight or something? And then everyone was like, no, no, they're breakdancing. And then I got kind of in, just a peek over someone's shoulder. And I think just something about it really just kind of grabbed me, I guess. I had been doing Taekwondo for 10 years before that. And so I think it was just seeing people do footwork and flipping around and stuff, like, just, I was kind of at the point where I was sort of looking for something else to do other than Taekwondo.
Mhm.
And then it just kind of clicked. And one of my friends knew how to do a couple footwork moves and some freezes. So he sort of taught me. And then it just kind of started from there. And then I started finding out about the local crews. So like Albino Zebra was the first that really inspired me, because that was like the first, pro crew in the city.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
started meeting other people. And then, I ended up forming like a crew with, at first it was with Kyler from Ill at Will, Kaboom. And he's like been around in the Toronto scene and stuff. But so he was like the first guy that I linked up with because he lived maybe 10 minutes away from me, and we found each other online somehow. And then I met these other guys that all moved to London that were from Taiwan, and they were all B-boys there. And then they came to Taiwan, or came to Canada. And then
Mhm.
we kind of all met together, and then we kind of made a crew, or they already had a crew and I joined it. And then from there, that's how I started going to Toronto and like battling, because I was with these guys all the time. And
Crazy.
then that's pretty much how I got into it. And it was uh, just slowly learning new things and trying things and getting it, and then being like, oh, this is fun and I want to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of one thing that I've been thinking about a lot in recent years is like, why, what is it about breaking that like grabs people? And
Mhm.
I ask a lot of people like, well, what was it? What made you want to start? And a lot of times it's like, you can't really explain exactly why. It's just people saw it and it was just so different and
Mhm.
captivating for whatever reason. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
really
it was.
interesting.
I think it was for me. It was the movement, and then
Hmm.
also just seeing the effect it had on people. Like,
Mm.
because they weren't clearing out space for anything else, right?
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like everyone who's like at the dance trying to, like get their groove on or whatever, like trying to hit on like people that they have crushes on during the day. Uh, like they're not moving for anything else, but when b-boys wanted to take up the space, they move, and
Yeah.
then everyone's really into it for that 3 minutes or whatever.
Hmm.
And it started to get addictive. And then I think too, at the time when I started, a lot of people didn't think I was the right kind of person to b-boy, because
Right.
they just didn't see me fitting what they pictured was a
Yeah.
b-boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so even I got flack from like some of the b-boys at school, that basically telling me like I shouldn't be doing this, but then
Right.
that just made me want to do it even more,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I was, I came from like a fighting background. So I was like, okay, well,
Yeah.
maybe you're better than me now, but let's talk in like a year or 2 years. Let's see what,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that was kind of my attitude. And then I kept going back. And then the best was like seeing, I think, one circle like burning the guy who used to say like I shouldn't break in front of all of his friends, and then even his friends were like, yeah, you kind of killed him.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
pretty satisfying. And then it
Yeah.
just gets addictive, right? And then you find, I don't know if it was the same for you, but the more you keep increasing in level, the more those kind of characters show up in your life.
Mm.
That at least for me, it was okay. Like you got past school dances, and now you're at battles,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
other crews and other people, and then you kind of challenge them, and then
Hmm.
you go to Toronto, and then you're the new guy in Toronto, and everybody's looking to like beat down on you, and like it was just kind of like that. And I guess I just never wanted to quit, so I kept,
Yeah.
getting it, like taking the hits and then coming back and battling them like later, and
Yeah.
just keep doing that, repeating it.
Yeah. I think that's like an important part of the breaking, like the breaking journey, and like
Hmm.
why competitions and things like that are so useful, even though like for me personally, I don't really enjoy them now.
Yeah,
But
me
I
neither.
think that's like an integral part of your journey. It's like go through that. At least if you love it forever, then you love it forever. That's great. But like at least have that time where you're like pushing yourself and trying to like be the best and or be better, and even if it's just for your own personal like improvement. But
Right.
yeah, that kind of thing is so key. Like be the best in your school, and then be the best in your try and be the best in your area, your city, your province, your country, in like the continent,
Yeah.
internationally, however
Yeah.
far you want to go. But it's like,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, it's super useful for like motivating yourself. And yeah.
Yeah,
um
I've always felt, you don't necessarily need to enter competitions, but you need to battle. So
mhm.
oftentimes competitions was the only way we could
Yeah.
get a battle, because
Yeah. Yeah.
either people were too afraid to, start things with other people, or the timing wasn't right, or you're not at the right venue or whatever. But a competition is a very set, you
Hmm.
are expected to go do this thing.
Hmm.
Whereas, calling someone out in front of everybody is scary. right? Because it could go
Yeah.
really badly for you.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people were hesitant to do that.
And
Um,
sometimes people don't have a reason to do that even. It's
yeah,
like, I don't have a problem with this person. Like
right.
I guess people have different views of what exactly a battle is and why you would call someone out. Some people just want to like test themselves against this person, but some people it's like, I'm only gonna call someone out if I have a problem with them or something like
Right.
that. So yeah.
And that was, I think that was very much the older generation's mentality.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the only battles I ever had calling out was either people who had a problem with me or people who would tell me preemptively, hey, I want to battle you sometime because I really respect you and I want to test myself,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I was fine with either, but
Yeah.
I really appreciated the second one because then at least you kind of know it's coming.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like I remember, I think one time Scramble Legs or Scramble Lock, he told me that. He's like, dude, I want to battle you one day. And then
Yeah.
just when he called me out, it was no surprise and we just went at it. And
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
no, I love that guy and there was no hatred. It was just,
Yeah.
he's really dope and I want to test myself and he wants to test himself. And
Yeah.
it just kind of happened,
I think
and those I
that's
think are the best. Yeah.
yeah, that's super healthy too.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
the ones where like you might wait outside the jam and someone might, jump you, like those were not good. So,
Yeah.
those I'm glad that that doesn't really happen anymore,
Yeah.
because that's not healthy and it's yeah, it forms a very bad relationship with hip hop and breaking, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like spontaneous battles are still kind of nice though. Yeah, I just think back. I know you're into like Street Fighter and stuff like that, and I always just think about some of the stuff that I've seen in some of the competitions where like sometimes it even happens like in the tournament, but
Hmm.
it it gives it some more like I don't know what to call it, like character to the community,
I
to the scene. And like when you see someone, there's a bit of beef between the two players or something like that, and then someone wins and they just kind of like pop off on the other guy
Yeah,
and
yeah.
start going off, and they're not fighting or anything, and it's just kind of like this healthy or like kind of healthy uh rivalry that they have going. And like the other person,
Hmm.
they knew that they were talking shit and they knew like, okay, I lost like fair and square, they beat me and they just got
Right.
to take it. Like
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think when it's healthy like that, it's fine. It's
Yeah.
just I definitely coming up in Toronto saw some of the darker sides of
Yeah, for
that,
sure, for sure.
and those I would definitely not want newer generations to get involved in. And
Hmm.
it's stressful, right? Because
Hmm.
you're not only thinking about the battle, but you're thinking after the battle, like, am
Hmm.
I gonna have to deal with my physical safety? I mean,
Yeah,
thankfully,
yeah, yeah.
I was tried to be pretty nice to everybody, so I never really had that problem as much. But I have seen in the past jams where people got in fights or people
Hmm.
jumped each other,
Yeah,
and
for
I'm
sure.
I'm glad that that's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah,
But I agree with you. Like, there's a certain, I don't know. It's
it's a
like when I
limit,
watch,
you know.
yeah, and when I watch newer battles, sometimes I do feel like it is lacking. Like it feels more like a karate tournament than
Yeah, exactly.
uh,
Yeah.
like an actual battle. So
Hmm.
yeah,
But there's always kind of like what do you call them, things kind of work in cycles and stuff. And so
yeah, I think
people
so.
might get bored of that kind of thing and they want to bring back a bit of this rawness or whatever. So
Hmm.
as long as it's authentic, who cares?
Yeah,
And no one's getting hurt, yeah, who
yeah,
cares?
yeah,
um
for sure.
yeah, I want to kind of continue along your journey and just get more info on just how you connected with like GI and that whole
Mhm.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So with those Taiwanese guys I was talking about, they had a crew called Crazy Ghost Crew. I forget the meaning, but it's something in Taiwanese culture that ghosts and dancing have a correlation. So I think they
Oh.
they named it. I have to double check that, but that's kind of what I remember. So
Mhm.
anyway, we had our crew from London, and then they became friends with a bunch of Korean b-boys in Toronto, and then we just decided, hey, we should probably enter these Toronto events as one big unit, because like we're just stronger together. And so when we were thinking of a name, my one of my friends and I, he said like, oh, we should make it kind of like something to reflect that we're unexpected and we'll blow up on you, like that it's like a unexpected booby trap or something like that. And so we came up with the name Trip Line because it was kind of like the
Oh,
line
cool.
for like a landmine or a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
claymore or something. And so we started entering battles with that name. And then I remember the first or second time we entered a big jam in Toronto, we ended up going up against Ground Illusionz. And it was a really close battle. And like I
Mhm.
wish I still had the footage of it, but um it was like one of the best ones of the night. And I think from that battle, even though we lost, a lot of people were super surprised because they were like, who are these guys? And
Mhm.
you know, and then from there, we just started meeting more Toronto people and hanging out with them. We became friends with GI. And I think it was just kind of over the years, like I developed a relationship with Frost and Knuckles Takashi. He was another guy that
Oh,
around
okay.
that time I was breaking with him a lot. He was like one of the original Ground Illusionz guys. And then Trippy was another guy. He was like also an OG. And then Rubik's Cube was another guy
Right.
who I was practicing with a lot. And then I guess it just kind of naturally came to the point where Tripline was kind of falling apart because people were moving away or not dancing anymore, etc. We all stayed friends, but
Mhm.
had these things happen. And
Mhm.
then so I was sort of like a free agent for a long time. I was dancing with Correct Technique a lot, like Max, Willie, Daniel, Shaheen. I was with those guys all the time, but like I was never like in the crew, but
Mhm.
we would just hang out.
Mhm.
And I think Ruben just kind of had this idea, well, we've known him a really long time. Our styles mesh and we practice together a lot. And I think he kind of put the idea in the rest of the crew's head, like we should recruit him. And at that time, GI was very small, actually, like which
Oh,
sounds surprising now
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's huge.
yeah.
But at the time, it was kind of also in a down period because other members wanted to go do other things or join other crews, whatever. And so it was kind of in this rebuilding period. And so I think it was around 2005 that Frost was just like, hey, if you want to be down, I'm cool with that, and we can build like the new generation. And so I was sort of in that in between period where we were the ones kind of training like Ills and Burn and the people that everyone knows now,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
that sort of like 2005 to I would say like 2009, 2010, around there. We were sort of the in between generation, and then
Right.
we kind of helped like build the new ones.
Cool. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of cool seeing. It's kind of hard for crews to keep that legacy going.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed like you'll have really big crews, and then they have the people that kind of put their crew like on the map, and then a lot of times it's like it just kind of like dies after it
Yeah,
dies with them. They might
right.
recruit some new people, but it's like it doesn't feel the same. Like it's not the same crew anymore, kind of thing. But
I know, and
with
I wonder
GI,
sometimes.
yeah, with GI it
Yeah,
just
sorry.
feels a little different. Like, yeah.
I think it's, Frost really has this long-term vision in mind of that he wants it to be like a dynastic thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I agree with it too, because it's almost like the Shaolin Temple or something, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
have so much in-house knowledge that we don't want to just dissipate and die out. So
Mm-hmm.
there is this goal of finding the people that really mesh with you and who are eager to learn. And then
Mm-hmm.
we kind of download all of what we know into them. And the
Yeah.
hope is that they surpass us, right? It's kind of like kill your master, right?
Yeah.
Because if we are still better than the new generation, then I think we've failed, and then
Right.
breaking as a whole goes less, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
people
Mm-hmm.
50 years from now should be technically way better than people now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just natural.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we had that mentality. And I guess with breaking, when you put it that way, I think maybe because it's such an individualistic, ego driven kind of thing, maybe people can't really come to grips with that one day they might get old and not want to do it anymore, or they can't
Yeah.
physically do it anymore or whatever, so they don't pass everything down. But
Mm-hmm.
Frost, I think, has been very strong about the idea of we need to keep it going, pass it on, have a tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that's come up a lot recently, not just with say like teaching and passing on knowledge and stuff like that, but just yeah, like I don't know if you follow Renegade or DJ
Mm-hmm.
Renegade at
Mm-hmm. A
all,
little
but
bit,
he's
yeah.
he's just one of the guys that talks about this a lot, like trying to get the breaking community in particular to like step their game up of not only it's like, it's no one's going to care about you when you stop
Yeah.
dancing if that's all you had. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, okay, people within the community will maybe remember you, but if you don't like, if you want it to really go anywhere, you have to start actually laying down actual foundation outside of like the moves and things like that. It's
Yeah.
like so many people don't know like how to actually teach. They don't know how to
Yeah.
actually judge. They just kind of like, well, I'll just do whatever, and we'll do this class, and like, yeah, I guess I'll teach this and this, and yeah, whatever,
Hmm.
like whatever you want to learn, like it's fine.
Hmm.
But
Yeah. I
yeah.
think too, for a long time, there's this mentality of being nasty is enough. And I
Yeah.
think we've seen that's not enough.
Yeah.
You could be like the best b-boy or b-girl in your town, but if you don't network, if you don't reach out to people, you don't travel yourself, you don't make those connections, nothing's really going to happen for you aside from
Mm,
winning your local jam, right?
mm,
Like you have to actually make the effort to go out there and put yourself out there
yeah.
and reciprocate energy and like get to know
Yeah.
people. And I think I've just think of how many really amazing people didn't really get super far. Sometimes they didn't care enough to do it, or other times it's because they didn't really make the effort to do all the supplementary stuff,
Yeah.
like the teaching, networking, building with other people, etc.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I'm glad it seems like people kind of get it now, although maybe it's more about building their like IG following or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
that's the way people do it now, but yeah, you can't just being really good at breaking isn't enough, I think.
Hmm. Well, yeah, and just it's like you said, once you get older and maybe you stop breaking or you can't do what you could do before, like if people want to continue that legacy, there's other ways of continuing on past
Mm-hmm.
moves and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, not to say that like Frost can't get down or any of these older, not to say that he's even like old generation, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you can't, like, that's a skill that you should develop, is learning how to carry on, how to transmit your information, that you like, how to teach it effectively, how to
Mm-hmm.
get someone to understand these complex things like, say, storytelling, or how to like be creative within breaking, and
Mm-hmm.
you know understanding the nuances of a circle, or that kind of thing, or what it means to like battle properly. Like anyone can learn like a six step, learn a halo with enough time or whatever. But it's like learning the stuff like outside or around that, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
is is really hard
Right.
to convey to students.
And I think about this
Mm.
a lot in terms of I've always felt that there's kind of this constant sort of b-boy or b-girl spirit that has sort of transcended different generations. So what I mean by that is, even though the moves, let's say from 1986 are not the same as 1996, are not the same as 2006, there's a certain energy that you can see through different dancers that is very similar, even though the moves manifest differently.
Mhm.
And I think that's actually the hardest thing to teach, because
Mhm.
how can you tell some kid born in 2006 how to feel it like it was 1994? Like it's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
they have no frame of reference, and it's not their fault because they weren't around at that time, and the only thing that can give them any sort of reference is old footage, which obviously, they should already be watching, but I can't blame them, and I used to kind of get a little more frustrated about that. But then when I really sat down and thought about it, I'm like, oh, probably some b-boy from 1978 is going to think that our generation sucks,
Yeah.
because it doesn't reflect. And it's kind of like music, but
Mhm.
then I think how certain songs really keep staying popular because they have a certain spirit. And I think
Mhm.
it's the same with breaking. So
Yeah,
as
for
long as
sure.
you convey the spirit of the thing, then I think the rest will figure itself out, or manifests itself in a good way.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that, yeah, breaking in particular is still so, or just dance, I think in general, or maybe like what we like street dance, that kind of stuff. Like maybe ballet has this long history and, you
Hmm.
know, whatever. But a lot of these like sort of street dances are so young, relatively speaking. And then it just doesn't have the same kind of like tradition and yeah, formalized like ways of passing on knowledge and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, but it's slowly changing. And I think even things like more and more with the advent of like the internet and stuff like that, um, it made access to footage so much easier. There's more people who are like, you know, trying to curate content. Like here's, you can watch all the new footage and here's the people doing all the recent battles, but then here's people doing like, what's his name, Korean rock, and he just has
Hmm.
like all this random stuff from all over the place of like old styles and people that, you know, capture what you were talking about, that so that sort of like essence of breaking.
Hmm.
And you don't have to break like them, but like watch how they're doing it, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Or like
for sure.
Bag of Clips, I don't know if you
Yeah,
follow that.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
like checking out the Canadian history of all these places all over, like east to west. And it's really cool seeing that. And you, I think when you start digging deeper and you dig it back into the history of things, it's like it gives you this better understanding of like what what you're talking about, that
Yeah,
essence, you know.
for sure. And I've found a lot of satisfaction now in when I meet younger people or something like that, and I'll ask them, "Oh, hey, do you know Boogie Brats or do you know
Mm-hmm.
this?" And they'll be like, "No," and then I send them a clip, and just watching them watch the footage, it's so satisfying because they're just
Yeah.
so blown away. Like, what year was this? How is this possible? Like, you know, and it's and then it's not in a condescending way, but just being like, hey, look, this there was this really creative time in breaking, and you should watch more stuff from it because
Mm-hmm.
you'll have a better frame of reference when you watch new stuff and
Mm-hmm.
see where people are getting their ideas or what they're trying to bring back or you know how things
Yeah.
are different now. So yeah, just like learning how to analyze these different periods of history and breaking, I think is super important, and it
Mm-hmm.
just makes you a better b-boy. You know, like I would. There was a time where with Ills, I'm like, well, I can't teach him anything physical anymore because he's way better than me now.
Yeah.
So I'll just send him clips, you know, and I would send him old Ken Swift and like Euro stuff and
Mm-hmm.
like actual force and you know all these things that he wouldn't really. And I remember once he told me, "Man, I'm so glad you told me who Float was." Because he's like, when I met him at a jam, I wouldn't have had any idea that he was this legend of a b-boy, you know,
Mm-hmm.
just because he just looked like a normal guy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I sent him the classic Float clip in the green, you know, sweater where he's like at a wedding or something, and he's just like, you know, I think just having that context has made him a stronger dancer too. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's
yeah,
like, you know, we're talking about breaking, but you could apply this kind of thing to any whatever field you're in or whatever. Like if you want to get good at that thing, like you want to
mm-hmm.
learn everything about it or as much as you
100%.
can, and you want to look at like, well, where do these ideas come from, or where does this technique come from, or whatever. And it's just going to only, it's only going to make you stronger and make you
Yeah.
better at that thing, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, that was pretty much my mentality when I started training jujitsu about 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know that there's all this new competition footage and all these current battles and fights, but I actually went back to UFC one. I watched like a documentary on Hicks and Gracie because I knew like
Mm-hmm.
this is like the Ken Swift of jujitsu. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna watch him and see how
Yeah.
he fought, and then you know, and then you realize like your basics carry you a long way, and it's the same in breaking, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And like the way you would watch these guys fight back then when people knew less, it all the principles still apply today, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Even though there's all these new intricate moves,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you still got to know how to like open someone's guard or pass or you know how to escape bad positions, things like that.
Yeah.
It's all the same, you know, so
Yeah.
it's the same thought process.
And I think that's one of like, in some ways, one of the negatives about breaking is that it's so, there is part of that history of breaking that's like emphasis on creating new things and like innovating and doing this stuff and sort of like moves and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which is also one of the reasons why it's so great,
Mm-hmm.
why it captivates people. But when that becomes like too much of the focus, you lose like that kind of
Yeah.
mentality of yeah, just kind of like going deep on something so simple that's
Mm-hmm.
not really exciting or sexy kind of thing, like it's
Right.
not cool to talk about like the intricacies of a CC or a hook, or like why the six step is such a dope pattern or that kind of thing, because
Mm-hmm.
like everyone's like, well, I learned that in the first week, like who cares?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I think, and this is something that, yeah, like I try and do with the podcast and with the stuff that I release on YouTube, is like trying to get people to think a little deeper, think past those the wow factor and the moves and things like that, and think like, well, what's like the mentality behind this? Or
Mm-hmm.
even just, yeah, looking at history, what we were just talking about. Like you mentioned Ken Swift. Like when I first started, I saw Ken Swift and I thought, like, this guy sucks. Who is this guy? It was like
Right.
some battle in Korean. I was way more interested in like seeing like Crumbs, and he was doing all this crazy stuff. And
Was it
now
that
when I,
one on the big stage with People Crew and it
yeah,
was
and
like
Bag of
Bag of
Tricks, and
Tricks? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That was one
and
of my
that,
first tapes too.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the first time I saw Bag of Tricks too. And I saw Gizmo, and I was like, whoa, what the hell? And he was
Mm-hmm.
he was one of those guys that was like, he's not he's doing like cool stuff, but it's not like a physical feat, like Crumbs is just really strong and he's doing like weird positions and things like that. But I saw Gizmo and he's doing like, his behind the back knee thread, whatever you want
Mm-hmm.
to call it, like the Gizmo thread, or
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
his kind of like flare, one-handed flare grabbing the crotch kind of thing. And like, this is all these different things. And it was like kind of more details. And then Ken Swift, like, I didn't really get what he was doing a lot of times. And then
Mm-hmm.
going, as I got further into it, I saw him and I saw guys like Migas. Like, I don't think if I saw Migas when I first started out, I'd be like, actually, in what was it, Lords of the Floor, I saw him
Mm-hmm.
and K Mel, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get Migas. I
Right.
was like, oh, he's just doing
Threads and
threads and
spiders
footwork and
and
like it, okay. And I know even then that was like a little bit past his sort of like prime, I guess, or whatever you want to call it,
mm-hmm.
right? But yeah, it's like there's certain people that you see that you don't really appreciate what they're doing until you get a little deeper into the dance,
Right.
and you start to think about the details and the little things that make something so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think in a way, and maybe this was a blessing, in the early days, those were the guys that actually appealed to me the most because I was not a very physical person,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So, I would try mills and flip. Like to this day, I can't do power combos. Like I'm
I'm the
just
same
not,
way.
yeah, it just doesn't work. There was a time where I could do mills. There was a time I could do a decent backspin and pop up and stuff, but it just didn't click for me. Whereas footwork, I think because of Taekwondo, it really came naturally. And so when I watched people like Ken Swift or Gizmo or Migas, I was so amazed at how they were able to go up against people with such physical ability, but still beat them with like their minds.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what really
Mm-hmm.
got me attracted to that. And then,
Mm-hmm.
in hindsight, I wish maybe I had spent a little more time with power and the pure physical, but
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, it's just that to me was magic in itself. The idea
Yeah.
that you could make up your own moves and combinations and just like blow people out of the water because they didn't think of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you deem their physical ability kind of irrelevant because you've now grabbed the attention of the crowd. Like
Yeah.
there's that one Gizmo clip. I think it's where was it? Somewhere in Toronto. I think it might have been the Docks or some big event. It was huge, and it was like him and I think Tic Tac, and they were up against these two other guys, and it was a very quick battle, like back and forth. But there's this moment that I think you could see Gizmo was kind of pissed off. Like he just really looked like, screw this, I'm gonna end the jam. And he just pushes like his partner out of the way. and does this mill, but like the way he did it was so weird, and like grabbed his own leg or something.
Mhm.
And this was 1995, so people had never seen anything like that. And you just see the camera clouds up with all the people standing up, blocking the view because they're going, like the house is going insane,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And like to me, that's the ideal of breaking. I think coming from a Toronto perspective is that
Mhm.
you want to think of that next level stuff that people can't even touch because they're just not smart enough, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This is one thing that just kind of like clicked in my head right now. But it's kind of neat that you can see people's personalities really come out in how they break, how they dance,
Mm-hmm.
how they choose to approach something. And like in a lot of ways, like that makes me feel like, it's not really like wrong per se, like any one approach. It's like that's just
Mm-hmm.
how they are, how they think. That's what they gravitate towards. And
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, Toronto's perspective. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing to talk about too. Of
Yeah, it's because I feel like, and I'm sure you experienced this too, because I think we're of the same generation. You know, different cities had a very particular point of view of how to break, right?
mm,
And I think one thing I love about Toronto that I feel grateful that I realized very early on was that it had a very unique point of view of how to break, and it was very advanced, you know.
mhm.
And I think Canadians do have a tendency, you know, we kind of have that tall poppy syndrome of like, we're not good enough
Yeah,
until
yeah,
somebody else tells us we're good enough.
yeah,
It's like Drake had to go outside the US and become friends with Lil Wayne before people realize, oh, he's actually quite good at you know,
yeah, yeah.
at bars. So like it was kind of the same where, you know, people would go, oh yeah, Toronto, this, whatever, but like look at LA or look at Chicago. And I always thought, no, Toronto is really good. Like
Mhm,
of all the tapes I've seen, the underground stuff from Toronto was my favorite.
mhm.
And so I was really grateful that early on, like I was able to learn from people. Like Puzzles was actually the first person to really be like a mentor to me, you know,
Right.
because we met at a jam, and I think he liked the way I was doing stuff, and he really put me on like, here's who you should watch, and here's how to do things, and really help clean things up, and like just know what to look for.
Mhm.
And I think through him, you know, it kind of opened up everything else that I was able to see that the city does have like a really rich tradition that I think now people understand and they see it, right? Because they see Migas or Dizzy or Puzzles or Hills or, you know,
Mhm.
whoever. So yeah, and I'm glad that there's like a very a recognition, I think now,
Mhm.
you know. But I don't know. I haven't been back in a while, so I don't know how the breaking is now among the younger kids. But my hope is that they still, you know, value what's in their own city versus looking outwards. You know, not to say
Yeah.
looking outwards is bad, because
Mhm.
my other favorite city was Miami, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah,
huge,
yeah,
you know, Flip Side and Skill Methods. Like those were my heroes, you know. So, but you should look at what's available to you immediately, and like you can actually
yeah,
meet these people and ask them questions. And
yeah. That kind of
so
reminds me of just something that it's come up a few times. Like you said, you're from London, Ontario. That's where you kind of started out. And
mm-hmm,
same with Albino Zebras, like talking with Lance and even just talking with like my own crew. They started in Victoria, which is on an island next to Vancouver. So it's not technically
right,
in that, it's sort of Vancouver, but not Vancouver, right?
right.
I mean, it's not Vancouver at all, like, but it's close enough that people make the trip. Anyway, but a big thing that I always heard is like, and a lot of these people are really like their way of thinking is so different a lot of times, and their styles are so different because in part I think because of like, yeah, just being isolated, and
Mm-hmm,
they'll go somewhere to a jam, or they'll go to like, Toronto or Vancouver or wherever it is, and they might get that sort of like burst of inspiration of just seeing all this different stuff and different ways of thinking. Not to say that people are like copying and biting whatever,
mm-hmm,
but you come back and then it's closed off again, and you don't have that
mm-hmm,
outside influence, and you look at the people that you practice with that are around you,
mm-hmm,
that kind of thing. And like, I think that's something that's a little bit lost right now with
mm-hmm.
the
YouTube and
YouTube online era where everywhere is inspiration and you're constantly bombarded by it. And it's nice to, at times, and I'm sure like all artists even do this, they'll have times where they just kind of like go into their studio or whatever,
yeah.
or they like go into a cave and make some stuff. Whatever. Like, I swear there's some artists that actually did that, where they just went into a
Yeah.
cave, like a literal cave, like whatever. But
Well,
it's like it's closing
yeah.
yourself off from that inspiration, and just like, okay, well, I'm gonna limit myself again. And I think that's where a lot of like creativity comes from, is
Absolutely.
these like limits, even if they're self-imposed. Like,
Yeah.
you've now given yourself a problem to solve. I have this information that I have to work with, but what can I come up with? What can I do? And that kind of thing. And I think that's like a bit of a problem that we have now, is like you're just constantly getting new stuff, and it's like, well, I'll just do that. I'll just do that. I'll just do that. I'll just do that. And you never really like, maybe it's harder for people to like really define their style, because it's like you're just always taking in what's new. And I think everyone goes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to that point too, there's YouTube kind of, it's been a great resource, like you said, with Korean rock and being able to look up any battle in human history almost. But I think it did kind of kill the mysticism of breaking, in that, when I was starting out in London, albino zebras were the guys, right? Like they were the ones that everybody would like worshipped and like wanted to be like, and they were our heroes locally. And I remember like nights where you didn't get to film things, but you just went there to watch them break. And that in itself, those memories that you can't really rewatch, but you just remember certain things. It creates like a legend around these people, right? So like I've seen Lance break so many times, and there's so many moves, incredible things he's done that I'll never see again,
Yeah.
And but to me, that adds to the legend of Lance, of like who he is and how amazing he is as a b-boy. And same with the other guys in the crew. And then you have that like image of that sort of mysticism to help you like try to figure out what you want to do and like how you want to look. And it's more obscure, so it actually ends up being this kind of like unattainable goal, but it helps you in a way. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but it's almost like having less footage was better, and just experiencing it was better. And then it really helped us to think like, how did he do that again? Well, maybe I'll try this instead. And then you end up finding your own thing, that was indirectly influenced by them. But nowadays, because we can just watch anything at any time, I think most people just kind of see who's winning BC1, and then they just sort of think, okay, well, those combos work, so I'm going to learn those,
Yeah.
And then it takes the element of surprise away in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Like, you can see it in a lot of different areas. Like you see it in the way that crowds react to stuff too. They're just so overstimulated. Like everyone's seen everything. There's no mystery. And that's why when someone shows up that comes out of nowhere, like it's so exciting, because you haven't seen anything. You don't even know who they are. Like, who is this guy? Who is this girl? Like, I don't know who they are. I've never seen anything. And then
it's sad when it's like everyone is amazing and nobody cares. I feel like Russell Crowe in Gladiator, she's like, are you not entertained? Like this person just did like crazy shit and nobody cares because they've been overstimulated and it has no effect on them anymore, which is sad,
but it's like and it's not just breaking. Like I think about so I watched a lot of pro wrestling and like, with big promotions like WWE, or now there's the new one, AEW, which is one that I watch a lot now. Like one of the problems with, say, WWE was like you have all the WWE people, and like a lot of the times you'd get the same matchups, the same people, it's the same roster, and you just kind of see the same people over and over and over again. And it's like, after a while, some people get the push into the kind of spotlight, but it's still kind of like limited in a way. But when you read into like the history of pro wrestling and how it used to be before kind of WWE gobbled up everything.
Hmm.
There was like territories, and the
Right.
way that
Right.
worked was like, and it just, I don't know, maybe it doesn't work in the same way now, but you have that local territory, and you'd
Hmm.
have the talent that's there, and then they would kind of like run stale with the crowd. Like their story's finished. People don't want to like see them anymore. So they would move on to a
Hmm.
new territory where they're fresh again. And then
Hmm.
new people would come into the territory, and you have something new and fresh again. And
Hmm.
it's like, you know, that kind of thing of fresh faces, new things. Um, and I guess it's just that kind of thing maybe doesn't really, it's not exactly possible now.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
wonder too because the battles are so high frequency now.
Mm-hmm.
I remember for us, maybe it was if we were lucky, 5 jams a year. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so most of your time is spent training. So then, actually, because you have such a huge gap between jams, there's a
Mm-hmm.
long time to improve.
Mm-hmm.
So a
Yeah.
person could come back to a jam and they're like a completely different or new and improved person, right?
Yeah.
And then it just adds a whole new dynamic to the game because maybe the other person who was on top has been slacking, and
Mm-hmm.
then the new person comes and they're hungry. It's like Rocky 3, and they're Mr. T, and they just like bulldoze people because they've been wanting it for so long,
Mm-hmm.
and they were training in secret because there was no YouTube. They weren't posting footage to Instagram or anything like that. They were just training. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not really trying to like solve the problem or anything like that.
no, it's just it's
But
it's just different now. That's all.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I think, well, like just as one like issue that I kind of see as like, yeah, just an issue is that, there's only kind of one way to make it as a
Yeah.
dancer, is like in breaking. It's either through competitions or becoming a judge, and becoming that like cream of the crop kind of person that everyone wants
Yeah.
to book, and that kind of thing. And which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but I just think breaking needs more than just
Yeah.
that.
I
And I
agree.
get that, there's just, for whatever reason, there's just not the same kind of financial support for it, and that's a lot of just
Hmm.
people doing stuff out of passion, that kind of thing. And I get people not having incentive to do that kind of stuff, but
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, I think it needs more of that, more people, yeah, doing, not to toot my own horn or whatever, but I think having more interviews with people, getting to hear their thinking behind stuff, having
Hmm.
more people do stuff like what Focus is doing with
Yep.
uh online, whatever, like basically an online school,
Hmm.
more people teaching it more, and teaching it effectively.
Hmm. Hmm.
Stuff like what Frost is doing with, like, I forget what it's called, his like
Rhythm
rhythm, yeah,
or
like a
yeah. Yeah.
real program
Right.
that's
Right.
like, yeah, you learn breaking, and if you continue with breaking, that's great, but if you don't, you've learned a whole bunch of stuff with this, and like this has benefited your life in different ways, and that kind of thing. But it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like a really well thought out program that,
Yeah.
yeah, and not
I
just kind
know.
of like, I'll just do whatever.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the big impediment to that is ourselves because
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of B-boys are not very organized. And then I think we're also very naturally allergic to any sort of structure or
Mm-hmm.
any kind of, it's almost like if you make some sort of program, people will just hate on it right away and say that it's watering it down or making it it's not raw enough or
Yeah, or
whatever,
like
10 million reasons,
there's
you know?
another thing too with like wanting to make money too
Yeah.
off of it, and it's like, I don't know why it happens, but there's like a real aversion sometimes to someone charging money for something, or charging
Yeah.
too much in their opinion. And a lot
Yeah.
of time, I think part of it too is like, maybe YouTube is to blame a bit for,
Yeah.
like, you just get free content and stuff like that, free tutorials, free whatever, and like for people to actually want to pay for something. I don't know. Some of it maybe is also the ego that's built into the dance of like, well, I don't want to learn from this person. Like I'm better than that. I don't have anything to learn, like that kind of thing. But I don't agree with that. But
yeah, and I feel like whatever it is, we're gonna have to figure it out collectively before Paris 2024. You know, because
well, we should have already figured it out.
You know? Yeah, we're way behind schedule because I mean, I don't know how. I haven't talked to any of my skateboarding friends about how they felt about skateboarding in the Olympics, but from an outsider's perspective, I thought it was pretty good. You know, in that, like, it was entertaining. I saw it resembled what I see on Thrasher or things, but obviously I'm not a skater. But I think where I wouldn't want it to go is like what happened to Taekwondo in the Olympics or Olympic karate, things like that, where the rule sets really dilute the art or the effectiveness of the art. And you know, like, I don't know if you saw, but there was an Olympic gold medal match for Olympic karate sparring, and the guy who won the gold medal won because he got knocked out by the other guy, and so the other guy was disqualified. The other guy was disqualified for kicking him in the face and knocking him out, which in, you know, the real world, I would think that shows good karate, but in Olympic worlds, that's you lose, and that's bad sportsmanship, which is extremely odd to me. From a common sense perspective. But I think, you know, in the same thing with breaking, I just hope that whoever's involved with it knows what they're talking about, what they're doing, so that we're not we don't just turn into gymnastics 3.0 or whatever.
From what I know of the judging system, like, I still want to get an idea of like the updated version, because I saw some stuff before, but from what I know, it's like very in tune with what breaking is, as much as you can with like having a judging like system, that kind of thing. It seems to be have enough freedom that it doesn't matter what style you do, that kind of thing. So it doesn't stifle creativity of like, you got to check these boxes of, you got to do footwork and power and this and this and 8 freezes and that kind of thing. And it's also like round for round, it's and the rounds are judged on like there's like a slider or something like that. So it's like you can weight rounds, like this round is worth more than this round, or they beat them by more, like that kind of thing. And then the way that it's divided up, I don't know the details, but it's kind of, it roughly breaks down to mind, body, and soul, that kind of thing. So the mental side, the physical side, and then the kind of like, I don't know, expressive side, or however you want to put that. So which is, in my opinion, like that is a pretty good representation of what breaking is.
I'm cautiously optimistic for it. I do overall support the idea of it, just because of how much opportunity it's going to give to so many people, because you know, like in our time, we really didn't have much to look forward to other than jams locally, or maybe you got lucky and you were able to pay for a trip to LA or France or something on your own and, you know, go experience something. But there was no avenue to become an Olympic champion, or, you know, even Red Bull didn't really exist back then either. Which I think is probably our closest thing to like a world championship now. So, you know, and even though I'm not the craziest fan of Red Bull style breaking, like, I'm glad it's there so that people who do want to go that path can do it.
And,
you know,
and it seems like in general, there's a lot of people that are involved that care about the culture, and they want to have it go in the right direction, while still providing people with opportunities to make it a career or whatever, that kind of thing. So I've seen a few like articles that they've put out that are kind of like, here's the history of breaking, or here's like, I don't know, it's just stuff about like the kind of cultural side, I guess. But I think that also just requires the community to, maybe it's not even for the community, it could just be for the general public. But I always found like the community seems more focused on what's the latest trend in moves, who's winning the battles, who's doing this.
It's very like, short-sighted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I saw someone posted this recently. It was like just looking at the like ratio or whatever
Okay.
between, it was like some top 10 sets of 2021 or something like that, and it has like 200 something upvotes or whatever the hell, wherever it was posted. And
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
it was like a thing on Focus talking about like the new judging system for the Olympics, and it had like 12 or something like that.
Poor
And it's just,
focus.
yeah, and like, he
Yeah.
puts in a lot of work of
Yeah.
trying to make interesting content. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
It's sad. I mean, but
I think it's a
you
slow
can't,
growth too.
yeah,
Like,
you can't force people into liking or being interested in that stuff, but
yeah, yeah.
it does make me a little sad that there isn't more interest in that aspect of it, the
Hmm.
history, the fashion. I like how he puts those things out,
Yeah,
just analyzing old battles, or why did b-boys have fat laces, or things like that.
yeah, yeah,
I think that's cool, because
yeah,
you need that contextual history.
yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
um it's like any kind of shift in mentality or culture or whatever, like it's never going to happen overnight,
Yeah.
but you need people pushing for it, and people who are willing to, yeah, just like endure that time where it's not popular and people don't care about it. But if you really strongly believe in that thing, you just keep pushing it out there and trying to make it the best that you can make it, and that kind of thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
um yeah.
Well, that's why I saw, like, on your channel, I like that you've been putting out a lot of footwork tutorials and things like that, because
Mhm.
I think that's one of those other aspects where I feel, I don't know, maybe I'm off here, but it seems to me like the importance on footwork technique is not really there as much as it used to be.
Yeah,
It almost feels like people just use it either to score points or to set themselves up for big moves, but it's
yeah,
not
these days,
like,
yeah.
yeah, it's not really rewarded in and of itself, even though it can be such a beautiful and distinctive
Hmm.
part of breaking.
Hmm.
Um, so I like that you're doing that, because those things, they may seem small, but you add them up and, like, you can become
Well,
unstoppable.
yeah, it's kind of like coming back to what I was saying before. You can see people's personalities come out in how they dance and what they're interested in. And like, I'm definitely one of those people that thinks a lot deeper, maybe sometimes to a fault, I think, where I just kind of like get tunnel vision on something or whatever. But I like the little
Sure.
details. And it's not just breaking, it's like everything. If I'm playing a game or if I'm watching wrestling, like,
Hmm.
wrestling's a great parallel. Is like you have people who can do all these crazy moves and stuff, but the people that I like are guys like Bret Hart, who he was a technician. It was
Right.
about, and he had cool stuff that he would do, cool spots that he would do in his matches, but it was always about the story that he's telling. What am I trying to convey? How am I trying to connect emotionally with the audience?
Hmm.
And like, there's a legendary thing of him and Stone Cold having a match where they do it like a double turn, where Bret Hart goes from like face to heel and Stone Cold goes from heel to face, but it's like a gradual turn and it's like really subtle and you don't
Hmm.
see it. But like listening to them break it down, of like, oh, this little detail here, and like the way that they finish it tells a story and this kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it's like, those are the cool things to me.
Yeah.
Like, someone doing like a whatever 540, so whatever, somersault, cannonball, something
Hmm.
or other, like those are cool too, but that's like short term kind of cheap
Yeah.
thrills kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But people who can tell stories, and it's the same thing in breaking, like
Yeah.
people who can tell a good story in their round, like I don't care if they're not Red Bull BC1 champion or that kind of thing. Like
Hmm.
Migas is a perfect example of, he never like won this like whatever kind of international championship thing. Like, I think the best example was in the Lords of the Floor, the first video,
Hmm.
where they're introducing the Great Eight, and it's like style
Yeah.
elements, winner of this, blah 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 blah, skill methods, winner of blah 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 blah, and all these people. And then it gets to Boogie Brats, and they're like underground legends, something something. Like, they didn't really have any like huge thing, but they were still
Yeah.
one of those crews that was invited as like one of the best,
Yeah.
that kind of
I
thing.
remember, I distinctly remember that line too, because like a
Yeah.
friend of mine, when we were watching the tape, he just freaked out. He's like, "That's how you want to be," He was
Yeah,
just so, he was
right.
so high, and like the beat was so hard. Like the beat was so hard when they introduced them, because like it changed from the one more like Latino sounding beat to like
Yeah.
very, there's like a very like East Coast raw kind of beat, and
Mhm.
then yeah, and yeah, because I had heard of Boogie Brats, but I didn't realize that
Yeah.
they hadn't like won, these things, but I knew that they were out to kill,
Yeah.
they were,
It
yeah.
goes back to a bit of that like mystery kind of thing. And
Hmm.
I think it's still possible, but it's just way less common.
Yeah.
But like a good example is a guy like Bounce, and
Yeah.
although it's a kind of a different thing now because he's like on Instagram now and like
Oh,
posting
I didn't know
random
that.
little bits of footage and here and there, but
Okay.
he's one of those guys that is, or at least was for a long time, like surrounded by mystery, and like
Yeah.
it's like a lot of people know him, but not a lot of people have actually seen him. And if you've seen
Hmm.
him, it's because you were there at the jam and you saw him
Hmm.
get down, or
Hmm.
like it's like secret footage that people have hoarded or like downloaded in secret from wherever or that kind of thing. And like,
Yeah. To me,
yeah.
he's in the scene. He's like a reptile in Mortal Kombat 1,
Yeah.
like you have to get the double perfect no fatality on like the bridge stage, and then
Yeah.
it's like you have unlocked me. That's how I see him, because I've only ever seen him once in my whole life, and I
Yeah.
saw him get down once, and that one throwdown, I was like, oh my god, this guy. It
Mhm.
would just lived up to everything that I
Yeah.
had kind of pieced together about him.
But
Um,
he's another guy who's like, he's not, when you watch his rounds, like it's crazy the way that he's pieced everything together and the amount of stuff that gets packed into one round. But he's
yeah,
really like not doing anything that's like overly physically demanding or that kind of thing.
yeah.
And like even the way that, like, it's not even like necessarily super innovative, creative, whatever. It's like a
Hmm.
lot of
Hmm.
building off of basics, and the way that these things are put together, the way that he plays with directions and
Hmm.
timing and levels and all of that stuff put together. And like, if people have ever taken a workshop with him, it's like, this, I think this is a great example of like just that mentality is like, he'd talk about the 6 step and you have
Hmm.
6 individual steps. But for him, he was like, well, what's in between step 1 and step 2? There's like all these different
Hmm.
little things in between. And those are
Right,
all different little moves. And so like
right.
the angle that you have, it can change it, that kind of thing. And like you stop halfway between 1 and 2, and that's
Hmm.
another move that you have or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so
Makes
it's
sense.
like people who can break down. That's why I think like basics are so incredible. Like
Yeah,
you can go so
takes
far with
you.
just knowing like, I don't know, like 6 moves.
Yeah,
But if you have
I
the
think
right mentality, yeah.
it's to that point of effectiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like people can do really physically difficult things, but not be effective at either looking cool or gaining attention or
Yeah.
captivating an audience, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then people who have like Bounce, very physically simple things, but it's technically very advanced.
Mm-hmm.
Those that has effectiveness, and it can
Mm-hmm.
also draw the eye, right? I think
Yeah.
that's like mostly what you're trying to do, is draw the eye somehow, or get people interested in what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, yeah, there are people who are very technical who still are not very effective at drawing the eye, but
Yeah.
that might be a lack of charisma or like some other element of it.
Yeah.
And I look into that a lot because, like I said, like I don't really have many power moves, and I wasn't like a highly super physical b-boy, but I just really studied people that could do a lot in a short amount of time. And like,
Mm-hmm.
why is it that they can do that? Like, why can Cloud just like blow up a room
Mm-hmm.
with 3 moves?
Mm-hmm.
And that, those were the people that I studied the most, because I thought like you want to be efficient with like what you put out, but then also your stamina, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think maybe not so much now, but back then you could end a jam in 4 moves, right?
True.
And you didn't need to be going these marathon rounds like today.
Hmm. Hmm.
Although I don't know, I started watching some footage again, and I feel like maybe it's starting to come back. I don't know if it's anecdotal, but I felt like what I was watching, people actually were shortening their sets and tightening it up because maybe
Yeah.
people are getting bored of the super long set,
Yeah.
which I think would be great because it makes it more interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
yeah.
I think that's something too to talk about as well. And I always think about this with like, well, fighting games in particular, but just any
Hmm.
competitive kind of game. That or anywhere there's competition, there's always sort of like a what do you call it, like a meta that develops
Hmm.
of like this is the stuff that works. And
Yeah.
then, especially with breaking or just something like dance, it's so much freer because like, with a game it's like this is the thing that they've made and there's only so much that you can do with it because like they're not adding things, you're discovering things or you're breaking the game maybe and there's a bug that you can
Hmm.
exploit or whatever,
Hmm.
but it's like that you're kind of limited to what they gave you. But
Hmm.
breaking
Hmm.
as an example is like you can at any point just be like, oh, I'm inspired by this garbage can and I'm gonna somehow
Right.
make that work, like whatever it is, right?
Right, right,
Like,
right.
oh, this fan is really cool, like the way that it moves and like it's spinning at the same time, like I'm going to use that as inspiration and like maybe
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
that becomes a game changer, that kind of thing. But what I'm getting at is like, yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how the meta of like what wins competitions has changed over
Hmm.
the years and how it continues to change. And like,
Hmm.
you know, people can have that mentality of, well, okay, well, just got to do more moves than the other person. You got to go longer. And like, no, that's not the way it works. Like eventually there's a certain point where it's like, all right, this is too
Hmm.
much. We've explored that
Yeah.
thing. And now we got to go back. And like
Yeah.
one of the best examples that I can think of is like in the 90s, you had this like, uh, what do you call it? Like revival, or I guess, of breaking after it died in the 80s. And like people
Hmm.
got back into it, or there were people who were carrying it on or whatever, but it was like another
Hmm.
boom in the 90s and it
Hmm.
was like super
Hmm.
all about creativity and doing crazy things and things like that. And especially on like say the West Coast, so it's like all this crazy power going on and whatever. And then in like the early 2000s, that kind of like creativity and doing different things, you had like super weird like abstract people
Yeah.
and like
Circus Runaways
circus
and
runaways and things like that. And like it reached a point where it was like, not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it was like, all right, this is kind of like not, it's becoming not
yeah.
breaking sort of, or it's
Hmm.
like starting to go in that direction where it's like, all right, where do we start calling this something else?
Hmm.
And this
Hmm.
is breaking
hmm
and it's its own thing now,
Right.
right?
Right.
And like that, then you saw the kind of like opposite reaction to that with the kind of like resurgence of like Zulu Kings and Rocksteady in this more like traditional style and like
Yeah.
emphasis on the basics and foundation. But then that was like too much, and people were like, you can't win a jam with like 6 step into a chair freeze and that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Oh man, that was honestly my favorite time to battle because it was hilarious. Like the
Yeah.
things that people thought were actually hurting me. You know what I mean? Like I'd be like, really? That's all you're gonna throw? Okay. Like, and then you do exactly what they did and then throw, and it was so easy to win back then
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
they thought they kind of didn't get the point of what Zulu Kings were doing, right? Like
Yeah.
so they were trying to be this like Kirkland brand version of Zulu Kings, and then and then they would try to do these things, but they didn't. They missed the point of the
Yeah.
spirit of like all the other stuff that you had to know to make that work. So
Mm-hmm.
they would just do the moves, and then you're like sitting there watching them in a chair freeze for 10 seconds, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
all right, well, all right. If
Yeah.
you really want to throw that round away, go for it, and
Yeah.
then you go out and burn them, right? Like um, it was a funny time, definitely. But then, yeah, like I did
Yeah.
worry about that was becoming the trend. It was like the new air chair was to match your Pumas and your t-shirt
and have your like foam hat and like
yeah.
this whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah, like I just always thought that was kind of interesting, and that you see the trends evolve, and like, you know, oh, this is the routine era, and like routines reign supreme, and then that's kind of like past, it's moved on, like not to say that routines don't exist, but like there's sort of this emphasis again, like maybe it's because of Red Bull BC1 and a lot of these like big one-on-one kind of competitions, that's like the focus is back on like solo stuff and and that kind of thing. But it, you know, it's just like you see it everywhere, that
yeah.
people, I think it's like human nature, we
Yeah.
explore one way and we find that limit and like, all right, this is maybe too far, okay, we got to like rediscover where is that center, that ideal kind of like way to go, but that's always changing, right? It's like you need people exploring all those different areas and like doing things that are unorthodox and doing things that are like pushing things physically and
Right.
whatever, like,
They all have
and
their place.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like you, yeah, like you see it everywhere with, you know, you could talk about like the political climate and, you know, left and right and all this stuff, and like
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
glad those people exist, like I hope they don't hurt anybody, but I'm glad that
Yeah.
people are exploring those like ideas and whatever, and like, and maybe there's a good segue into your
Yeah.
journalism
Sure.
career. Oh, look at that segue. Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. Yeah, so how did you get into journalism, and what was it that kind of like got you interested in that?
Interested in it. Well, initially, I thought after college or around the end of college, I was kind of thinking that I wanted to go one of two ways, and it was either going to be, I was really interested in like intelligence work, like kind of like joining the CIA or CSIS or the
Oh,
FBI or,
damn.
you know, something like that, like law enforcement, but not necessarily being a local police. Like I was really interested in national security and things. Or it was to go with journalism because I thought it would be nice to, in the way that like a CSIS agent is working for the Canadian government and reporting to the Canadian government. In my mind at the time, a journalist is reporting to the Canadian public, right? So you're informing everyone of not only like what's dangerous or what could be potentially bad, but just what's going on, you know. And the only reason that any of us know anything 10 meters outside of our house is because of newspapers and TV and stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought, it sounded like a good profession, and maybe I wouldn't have to give up on things like breaking or other things, because in my mind I thought, well, if I become some kind of agent, then I'm probably not going to have friends anymore, and like, and my parents would be super scared. So I was like, you know what? Okay, I think I'll go the journalism way. And it's funny because so my first job in journalism was actually in Germany, because like I had done journalism school, and I went to U of T before that, and I did political science and French and German as my minors. And so
Oh, wow.
that was the way I got into working in Germany, because I had done an internship at CBC, but then at that time they really wanted to hire me, but they had just laid off like 2,000 people because of the recession.
Damn.
So they were like, we'd love to keep you, but we just have no space. And then I found out about Deutsche Welle, which is kind of like the CBC, BBC equivalent in Germany. So they're publicly funded, and they have services in different languages, kind of like BBC Radio. So I somehow got in touch with their English team, and they were saying, oh, we do actually have a need for English speaking journalists who know some German who could come and work here.
Oh,
and
cool.
So after a bunch of tests, I ended up going there. But then it was really funny because as a precaution, I did apply to CSIS. And then when I got to Germany, CSIS emailed back and they were like, are you interested to continue this process? But then by that time, I was already pretty into journalism. So I was like, thank you. But, so I always wonder, that's kind of one of the fork in the road moments in my life. Like I always wonder what would have happened if I went the other way. So yeah, I stayed out in Germany for almost a year. And I braked there a lot as well. So it was cool to be able to, work on my career, but then also keep dancing. And yeah, and then I was doing a lot of like international news, usually for radio or online out there. So at that time, it was, for me, German was learning it was just in high school. I was interested and I didn't really think it would be that useful in my career or anything like that. But
Hmm.
then around 2010 was, you had like the Greek Euro crisis. You had like basically Germany was kind of in the driver's seat for the European Union and still is.
Hmm.
So it actually became a very consequential country. So then learning German and understanding the culture really did come in handy. So in hindsight, it was cool to learn.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I was out there. I was doing mostly like EU focused news, but a lot of international stuff and doing like radio documentaries and reports and going in the field and all that. And then, but I wasn't sure how long I was going to stay out there, like visa situation wise. So I was applying to jobs back in Canada. And then CTV contacted me and were like, would you like to come be a TV reporter in Kitchener? So it was a
Cool.
very big jump going from, living in Europe and doing all that to going to small town Ontario. But I was like, you know what? I don't know when the next ticket home is. So let's just do this and let's give it a shot. And
Right.
then I was in Kitchener. So I was doing, your local TV news like fires, car crashes, like everything, like
Hmm.
your cat fashion shows. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
like just anything you can imagine on local news. I had to do that, and it was an interesting experience. Not the best workplace, but it's just kind of like everyone was young, everyone was hungry, and it was just kind of created this like weird situation. And I think too with TV, I just kind of felt like they were really pushing me to be someone that I wasn't, in the sense
Hmm.
of you kind of have to become this caricature of yourself to be on air. So you'll
Right.
notice when you watch TV news, people don't talk like that in real life, but they have to put on that sort of presentation.
Yeah.
And I learned how to do it enough to keep being on TV, but I always felt kind of weird about it.
Yeah.
And so after about 3 years of that, I moved to CBC because they were opening a new bureau in Kitchener, Waterloo, and they were trying to basically open up a new presence there with like the least amount of people possible. So it was only 8 of us
Oh, wow.
going into, like a coverage area of almost 500,000 people. And so they hired me and some other people from other like competitor stations. And then it was just basically 8 of us starting a radio station in the area, which was a really cool experience,
Cool.
looking back. So I did that for another 3 years. And
What
then it just got,
was there yeah, like any differences between, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but just like TV and
mm,
radio.
yeah, I think radio is a lot more intimate. And I think
Hmm.
this is why podcasts have really exploded, because in this
Yeah.
format, you can really be yourself and you're not
Yeah.
worried about as much.
Hmm.
Whereas TV, you really have to put on this persona and be like upright and aware. And,
Hmm.
you know, so yeah, I think people just open up more. I think that's why like, Joe Rogan or things like that are so popular, because you're really seeing how that person actually is. And because
Yeah.
the format is longer, you can ask lots of questions versus just getting 10 seconds of somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so radio was cool for that.
Mm.
And then, yeah, but I just got to the point where I came to a crossroads of, well, I've been doing this 6 years in Canada, but I feel like I want to get to the next level in my career, but there's nothing really opening up, because I think in the Canadian system, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of space at the top, you know? So a
Mm.
lot of the same reporters kind of get shuffled around up here. So
Mm.
then all the people like me kind of here don't really get to go up here, and like grow until you've been, 10 years in or something like that.
Right. Right.
So it just came to the point where I was like, well, I got to do something different. And my wife had a transfer offer for her tech company, to move to San Francisco.
Mm.
And since I have dual citizenship, because my parents used to live in the States,
Oh, wow.
uh, yeah, I just was like, well, it's either quit keep going at CBC and keep my fingers crossed that one day I'm going to get to Toronto or something, or take a chance and just go to the States. And so I took the chance and went to the States. And then 3 months later, Forbes was like, hey, you want to work for
Oh, wow.
us? So, which is kind of crazy if you think of it in perspective. It's like 6 years in Canada, knowing everybody and kind of trying to work in that game. And then coming here, knowing nobody. And 3 months later, I get to work here. So it really paid off.
Yeah. How is that experience being working with at Forbes?
I think the best way I can describe it, it's so I have on my desk at work a little figure of Morty from Rick and Morty.
Okay.
And to be honest, that's kind of how it feels. It's like every day is when you get assigned to something, it's like going through that green portal and
Okay,
just
okay.
seeing like the craziest shit in your life.
Cool.
Because it's kind of like that because you meet the like very influential, wealthy, powerful people because of the publication. And it's
Hmm.
really it's a trip because next it'll be like, hey, we need you to go interview, I don't know, DJ Khaled in a week. And then it's
Right,
like,
right,
okay, I guess I'm going to, and like that's how it is. And it's
right.
very dependent on like the magazine schedule. So I've just had times where I've gotten to meet people that I never thought I'd be able to,
Yeah.
and see how they live and what their
Hmm.
life is like and how they do things. And you get this backstage access that a lot of people don't get.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's how I describe working at
Yeah.
Ford. It's a
For
lot of fun.
for
Yeah.
people who are just listening, like we were talking about this before, but Matt's got a bunch of fridge magnets in the back, and it's all places that you've been through just traveling and through work and stuff.
Yeah, like traveling, work, some vacations, but
Hmm.
yeah, just because I'm based in San Francisco now, but our team flies all over the US and
Yeah.
sometimes abroad.
Right.
So I've gotten to go see a lot of the country in the last 5 years now. So I just started making a habit of buying a magnet every time, like a cheap magnet every time I go come back,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
my favorite one is actually that one. I don't know if you can see right here.
It's the
It's from
Texas one.
Texas. Yeah, and it says we don't call 911. And I just thought that was like the most Texas thing I've ever read, so I just bought it.
What's the coolest, or is, I don't know, the place with the most memories that you've been to through work?
um, I would say probably LA just because of how frequent we have to go there and
Hmm.
the caliber of people we have to interview there.
Hmm.
It's I mean, when I first went to LA, I thought it was super cool. Now that I've been there a bunch of times, it's you know, I lament about the same things that all the LA people do. Like I hate the traffic, people are super fake, whatever.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, it's all that. But that said, the people you get to meet in LA through work is quite amazing. So,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
been so yeah, I would say that. Like the shoot we did for Kylie Jenner, that was kind of surreal. Like it felt like a very out of body experience, getting to go to that house. Not that I watched the show particularly, but getting to meet them, getting to,
Hmm.
talk to them, see the house that the show is filmed in and all that.
Hmm.
Is it was just kind of like, whoa, is this really happening? Or another one was Floyd Mayweather. I got to meet him in Las Vegas, and
Uh-huh.
again, it's very like out of body experience, but you just kind of focus on what you have to do,
Yeah.
but there's this small part of you like, wow, am I really in this place? And that's kind of why I
Yeah.
describe it like the Morty thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your role in these interviews, are you doing conducting the interview? Are you doing the filming, or
So
all of
it
it?
depends. Yeah, all of it. It really
Hmm.
depends because we're all kind of trained on every different aspect.
Hmm.
So I can do both like the asking people and I can do the filming and recording and all that. So it really just depends on what's needed that day.
Hmm.
Um, so sometimes you kind of take a step back and you're just doing the technical.
Hmm.
Sometimes you're the one asking all the questions. Someone else is doing
Right,
technical.
right.
So it really depends.
Hmm.
The one of the ones I did recently with it was with Panda Express, and that one I all I had to do was ask questions and talk to them and get to know them,
Hmm.
because we had a whole crew to handle everything else. But
Right.
because I'm so used to using cameras and stuff, I can't help but like, hey, do you need me to carry that? Or
Yeah, yeah.
like it just feels weird to me to just come up, show up in a suit and ask questions. Like
Hmm.
I feel like I need to be like handling something. So
Right, right.
yeah.
Yeah. What a what an interesting journey you've led up until
Yeah.
now, and hopefully into the future. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how breaking really, I would say, helped a lot with
Yeah.
that career because again, there's a lot of similarities, and I think the biggest thing is noticing what everyone else is doing and then thinking, how can I do it differently? I think that's the biggest takeaway that
Hmm.
breaking has really given me for
Hmm.
journalism.
Right.
Because you start to notice trends and patterns, and then how things become kind of cliche or outdated. And then
Hmm.
you think, okay, how do I come about this with a fresh new idea or a different angle of how to execute this project or whatever?
Right.
And then I think breaking really has helped for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, there's a lot. It's kind of like we talk a lot about breaking here because we both break, and
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of like our background. But you could apply that to almost like anything that you start
Yeah.
with. If there's so much stuff, I always think this, that whatever you do, there's always something that you can learn, and there's what do you call them, like transferable skills between a
Yeah.
lot of things. And like I was just
Absolutely.
talking with Emstro the other day, and he was talking
Mm-hmm.
about like him and Switch talks about danceferable skills. So,
He comes up with the best sayings. Like
yeah,
that guy makes
he's
me laugh all the time.
yeah. But it's really true. Like,
Yeah.
whether it's dance, whether it's art, whether it's I don't know, whatever you do, like videography, programming, playing games, watching TV, any like,
Mm.
you know, there's things that if you're, because like what is it? We're kind of like as humans trained to, or it's in us to like see connections and make connections,
Mm-hmm.
which is why like conspiracy theories are a thing in our,
Are so popular.
are so
Yeah.
popular, right? We see things that don't exist, but like uh a lot of times like you can watch a TV show and they'd be like, wow, that was really, or you watch a movie and you'd be like, wow, that really captivated me. And like the way that it was told, the way the story was told. And then you start thinking about like maybe you're dancing and like, well, maybe how do I piece together these things that it's like a logical flow that makes sense, that builds up excitement, that leads to a
Mm-hmm.
high point, and then you have the
Mm-hmm.
low point,
Mm-hmm.
the contrast, and this kind of thing. And like if you
Mm-hmm.
can start thinking about those different connections, like, you know everything helps everything in a
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's one of my favorite books is the Book of Five Rings by Musashi. And I think one of the things he says is something to the effect of like, once you know the sword, you see all things,
Hmm.
like in kind of the idea, like once you learn how to sword fight, you'll just see it in everything else.
Hmm.
And I think breaking is the same. It's like, it's one of the hardest human activities ever. And
Hmm.
so if you can learn this, then you can apply it to anything else and probably be pretty good at it,
Yeah.
if you stay humble and put in the work, right?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
it gives you a blueprint for all kinds of things, like how to
Mm-hmm.
think creatively, problem solving, which is,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, they're the same thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and even just like training and dedication, but also just like learning difficult things and
Yeah.
challenging things, and learning to deal with competition, and learning to deal with like setting goals. And if you're really serious about it, like,
Yeah.
you know obviously there's people who just kind of like coast through it and they don't learn anything, or at least they don't learn anything immediately.
Yeah.
um
And I would add to that too, how to deal with stress and pressure
yeah. Yeah.
in a certain situation. Cause I've had
Mhm.
many times where like equipment fails or the talent is 2 hours late or
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff happens that you don't foresee, and then you have to kind of brainstorm, well, first keep calm and not freak out, and then
Hmm.
second, how to figure out a solution to it. And I think
Yeah.
being in those high pressure competition scenarios or cipher battles too, uh, that really helps you,
Yeah.
because there's like, that's one of the most nerve wracking things you can put yourself through. So if you can do that, then handling
Yeah.
like that stuff is not as bad.
I think that's a really good point too, that breaking especially has that sort of spontaneous side to it of like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, people have sets and stuff, but to me, like the real kind of like essence of breaking is that off, like just freestyle, kind of like the music comes on and it's not even necessarily reacting. It's like you just kind of, you get into that sort of flow state of just,
Mm-hmm.
I don't exist. I'm just, something else is taking
Yeah.
over, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know, learning to kind of like figure that out, especially if you don't sort of come from that sort of background. Like I wasn't like that before. I was very like, I got to do this, then this, then this.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
then later on, I kind of started to explore more with that of like just learning to let go and let go of
Yeah.
control and just kind of like adapt to what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that kind of thing helped me so much with like moving to Japan and like teaching English. And you have like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone has experience with that or heard other people, but like the system in Japan is very like disorganized.
Regimented. Oh, I was going to say, is it regimented?
It is regimented as well. And like why that's why a lot of times language is a problem to teach English language because
Mm-hmm.
it relies on later on, especially in junior high, it relies on people thinking creatively and like
Right.
thinking outside the box or finding a solution to like, I don't know this word. Well, how can I talk
Mm-hmm.
about the word? How do I, but people get very focused on it. But even in like,
Mm-hmm. I see.
it started recently in the last few years, depending where you are, they started teaching it in elementary schools. And it was just sort of thrown on the elementary school teachers who had never had to teach English before. And all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden they have to teach it.
Yeah.
And like a lot of them were just panicking and they would just be like to the foreign teachers, foreign
Mm-hmm.
like we're assistants like most of the
Mm-hmm.
time, but we ended up having to just take on the role of like an elementary school English teacher. And they're just like, a lot of times you get there and they're like, okay, here's just do the class. And you're like,
Yeah.
wait, what? Like, I'm supposed to be helping you. What's okay, I guess.
Yeah.
And you just have to step up.
Right. Right.
And, you know,
And
having,
do you speak Japanese at all?
now I do.
Yeah. But in
But
the
in
beginning,
the
it
beginning, I
must have
had
been.
like, you know, very basic kind of stuff. And you learn, I knew like sort of like first year Japanese. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, it's useful, but it's like, no one talks like that.
Right. Right.
And
You have to actually
especially,
learn how people use the language.
yeah,
Like
like
I found that in,
people use
yeah.
that language, but it's in a very, when you're being very polite and that kind of thing. But most of the time people speak a lot more casually,
Yeah.
and you know, you don't have to worry so much about that in general.
Right.
But yeah, it was like, all right, I gotta, and that was another thing too, is like I had to adapt, right?
Yeah.
But I think from that breaking mentality, it allowed me to just kind of not see it as like, it just was a new challenge. Okay, this is my new situation. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
how
Mm-hmm.
do I make it better? Instead of some
Mm-hmm.
people can get super fixated and um, they just don't want to adapt to it. And then it's the
Right.
same thing in like a round in breaking. If you mess up, some people fixate on that mistake and they can't move
Mm-hmm.
past it, and it ruins the rest of
Mm-hmm.
their round and maybe the rest of their battle. But if you can
Yeah.
just, you know, brush it off and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Or hiding your mistakes is
Yeah.
actually one of the best skills to have if you
Yeah.
can figure it out. Or
Using it
there's so
as a
many.
way to create something new or whatever. Crash to create, I
Yeah.
think is like
Yeah. Yeah, I
whoever's
super
either.
envy those people. Yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
like someone like say abstract who can just float into something else. And
Yeah.
or I'll ask him like, did you mean to do that? Yeah, I just kind of did it. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just it's so crazy that, but it's having that ability to rebound and redirect, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is super important. And yeah,
Yeah.
breaking does help with that.
But yeah, I think that comes back to like strong understanding of fundamentals and just like knowing yourself and your body and that kind of
Hmm.
thing. And I think that's like a really important thing with, again, like whatever you do. If you know
Hmm.
yourself and you know even just the basics of whatever you're doing, but you know them well, you can go super far. But there's a
Totally.
lot of stuff you could do with it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that might be a good spot to finish for now.
Yeah, for now, sure.
Um,
It was great to chat and like get to know you better and reminisce about all this stuff. And I love
yeah.
that interconnectedness of how breaking relates to everything else. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's super useful. And I'm glad we talked too about as a community, what should we do to improve our situation, especially with the
Yeah.
Olympics coming up.
Yeah.
because that's a huge opportunity, you know, whether you like the Olympics or not, and we may as well make the best of it.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted, why I kind of, well, why this podcast exists, or why it still exists, is to just have more voices that are out there, and you know, hopefully people listen to it. But it's not always the case, but yeah,
It's okay, man.
I think it's important
fun.
just to do it, even if it's just for me and you.
Yeah.
And
no, it's if it's fun, and you know, somebody out there gets something out of it, I think it's totally worth it. And hopefully, you know, I think this is how knowledge gets passed, and
exactly,
people think about things differently. So
no,
it's we're not here for the, I mean, having a lot of views and likes would be nice, but like I think it's more important that we have these talks and figure these things out collectively.
But it's like more about, I think these things are important for people to know about, and the things that you're saying, you probably think the same way, and there's probably some stuff that we agree on that we want people to know about.
Totally.
And like, so I think it's really great that with the advent of like YouTube and podcasts and things like that, and just free information, you know, there's, we talk a lot of in the breaking community as like YouTube is the great evil of it's killing breaking or whatever, but it's all in like how you use it, you know. I think just getting people to think deeper, think outside of just the dance and just the moves and that kind of thing. Hopefully this can be one thing that helps change that mentality, or shift it into more than just moves and that kind of thing.
I hope so too, man. That's definitely needed. And YouTube is not, to me, it's like water, right? Like water is necessary, but it can also kill you.
Right.
So
like anything.
It's just like anything. So it's just in how you use it and what are your goals. And I hope that people use it to look at, you know, the deeper elements, like what you're saying, and the history of it too, like know what's been done so that you can improve on that. And learn from it.
For sure. Well, thank you, Matt, for
thank you, man,
sharing all your thoughts and really interesting perspectives on things. And I'm always happy when there's someone who can go a little bit deeper and that kind of thing.
I'm glad. I'm glad you had a good time, and I did too.
So thank you to you, and hopefully we can do this again and just jump right into some other stuff next time, and just without the history and that kind of stuff. And just jump into whatever's interesting. Definitely do it again. Thanks everybody for watching and listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace. Now